I would like to welcome up Ashley Kilroy again to the stage.
All right, everybody, welcome back. I hope you had a nice break. And Elliot, I think you let everybody know outside that this is getting started. So we are really fortunate to have with us Representative Ed Perlmutter. We're so excited to have him here today. I know throughout a number of these presentations, we've all, we heard Mayor Hancock express appreciation to Representative Perlmutter for the work that Representative Perlmutter has been doing related to marijuana. And a couple other of the panels have spoken about him. So we're really excited to have him here. Representative Perlmutter serves in the 116th Congress. He's proud to serve on 3 committees in the House: Financial Services, Science, Space and Technology, and Rules. He is also a member of the New Democrat Coalition, which is focused on harnessing American ingenuity and innovation to create new jobs, greater economic prosperity, and a safer and more secure future for our country. Since 2013, Representative Perlmutter has been pushing to allow marijuana-related businesses and ancillary businesses in states with existing regulatory structures to access the banking system. Today, 47 states plus the District of Columbia, representing 97.7% of the population, have legalized some form of adult, recreational, or medicinal use marijuana. The Safe Banking Act, is focused on taking cash off the streets and making our communities safer and providing the certainty financial institutions need to start banking legitimate marijuana businesses. So please help me in welcoming Congressman Ed Perlmutter to the podium.
Ashley, thank you very much. Good morning, everybody, and it's great to be here. As she said, my name's Ed Perlmutter. I'm a congressman for the suburbs of Denver, so I represent everything between Denver and Boulder, west side and north side of the town. I've lived around here my whole life, and I supported the initiative back in 2000, and most of you know that in Colorado, our marijuana legislation really was started by initiative, by the people. And so it's been really grassroots up to sort of legislation that has led to what we've done here in Colorado. In 2000, we had our medical marijuana initiative, which I supported, and then in 2012 we had the initiative to legalize for adult use marijuana. That one I didn't, but I knew from talking to my family that it was going to pass, and it passed with a substantial number of people. And at that time, I served on the Financial Services Committee of the Congress. So banking, stock market, insurance, housing, monetary policy generally. And we knew, and Barney Frank, who was the head of the Democrats of our caucus, we knew there was going to be a collision between what the states were doing, whether it was with medical marijuana or now fully legal recreational marijuana, that there was going to be a collision between the federal law and the state law, because with Washington following right on the heels of Colorado and then a number of other states, the federal banking system was going to follow federal law. And as a consequence, as states by the people changed the law to allow for more and more marijuana use, whether it was medical or fully legal, that we were going to have a problem, that there was going to be a lot of cash that was created in the sale of marijuana-related products, and it was going to be difficult to bank it, to provide financial services. And so I undertook a bill, which we now call the Safe Banking Act, to try to normalize that situation so that if a business was legitimate in a state, that business could have legitimate banking services. Well, at that point, the Democrats were in the minority, Republicans were in the majority. We had a chairman of our committee who it was almost religious for him in his opposition to marijuana, to hemp, to just about anything that had THC in it. So he wouldn't give me a hearing, wouldn't allow for a markup of the bill, so we went to the Obama administration, as did a number of, I imagine, groups in here, and saying, hey, we need some relief so that we can do banking. And we worked with a guy named James Cole in the Attorney General's office, as well as with the Treasury Department, to try to come up with some system, some compliance approach that would allow for businesses to be able to get banking services, which then became what was called the Cole Memo and the FinCEN guidance. And so those two, the Treasury Department, the Justice Department, came up with these approaches as to how to provide banking services despite the federal law under the Controlled Substance Act saying marijuana, anything with THC is illegal for all purposes. So got those things. Some banking institutions, some credit unions were willing to undertake sort of the compliance that we require of them to provide financial services, and that worked okay, even though there were very few for a period of time, but there was still a ton of cash that was being created by these sales. Colorado, we had a murder over on the east side of town, a young guy named Travis Mason, who had just come back from Iraq, had 2 young kids, was going to be in the Denver Police Department, was in training for that, but he acted as a security guard at a dispensary across town, was murdered. There was a lot of cash stolen. We still haven't found the killer in that case. We've had armed robberies and other things that really, despite the Cole Memo and the FinCEN guidance, there was still so much cash being generated, it really was a target for crime, for assault and battery, robberies, even murder. So we continue to press forward with this bill. Still, we're given the cold shoulder by the Republican chairman of the committee, Henserling. But when Democrats won the House this past year, first bill up was, we had a hearing. Maxine Waters, the chairwoman from California, said, okay, put up or shut up. You've been saying this is a problem. Let's have some testimony. We had great testimony from the marijuana industry. We had banks, credit unions. We had the state treasurer of California, Fiona Ma, was one of our witnesses. We had law enforcement. We had minority cannabis business owners saying the need for legitimizing banking services. Passed we had the hearing, then we had a markup. We had all the Democrats on the committee, 34 Democrats, and 11 Republicans voted for it out of the committee. So it was 45 to 15. So a substantial bipartisan vote of a bill that had been stymied for 6 years. Now remember, too, when we had the Cole Memo and the FinCEN guidance, those are just administrative actions. So the Obama administration had taken those actions. When Attorney General Jeff Sessions came into office under Trump, he revoked the Cole Memo. So the Justice Department said, we're not going to do that. We're not going to say that if you go through these compliance hoops, no organized crime, kids can't get their hands on marijuana, it's open and transparent so we can make sure there's no tax evasion and things like that, that the bank would be sort of low on the enforcement priority scale. Sessions revoked that. Secretary Mnuchin over in Treasury said, we're going to keep the FinCEN guidance in place because we will disrupt what is now a several billion-dollar industry, and will really put these banks and credit unions in a pickle because they wouldn't be able to provide the services. So we passed this bill. Know that the administration is kind of schizophrenic as to whether they're going to support the marijuana industry or oppose the marijuana industry. We then start working, and I have 3 primary sponsors with me. One is a guy named Denny Heck from the state of Washington. Who's from Washington around here? Anybody come in from Washington? Well, too bad for your Washingtonians. Oh, there's a Washington. So Denny Heck from Washington, and then 2 Republicans from the state of Ohio, Steve Stivers and a guy named Warren Davidson. And they are the primary sponsors. I'd say Denny Heck and I, our primary concern, sort of underwriting this bill, was public safety. And Travis Mason is who we picture in terms of the public safety aspect of this. Steve Stivers, his district has Scotts Miracle-Gro. And many of you know Scotts Miracle-Gro is one of the biggest fertilizer companies in the country, New York Stock Exchange. And they realized that so much of their business was coming from marijuana operations, they wanted to make sure that they could continue to provide services to the marijuana industry. And then Davidson was more of a libertarian bent, saying, look, why are we even regulating this area at all? So the 3 of us, or the 4 of us, worked together. We ultimately, last week, were able to pass a bill 321 to 103. So it's 229 Democrats, 91 Republicans, and 1 independent voting for something where not a single bill involving marijuana had passed or even gotten to the floor of the House since marijuana was made illegal in 1971. So this was kind of an icebreaker, which now is going to the Senate, and we think will ultimately pass the Senate and get to the President. And we have our fingers crossed that he will support the bill and sign it if the Senate passes it. So it's the first of about 4 or 5. There are many, many marijuana pieces of legislation in the Congress right now, but the others are sort of in different groups. One is on research and testing. Another is on use of marijuana by veterans and PTSD problems that they may face. Another is on taxes. And finally is the big package, which is on descheduling or rescheduling marijuana and the criminal justice reform and social equity reform that would come from that. But the banking piece really is the thing that is the icebreaker in all of this, because really no marijuana legislation had hit the floor of the House in 50-plus years. So we feel pretty good that there is bipartisan support for fixing the law so that the federal government catches up with the states. As Ashley said in her introduction, we now figure there are 47 states that have some level of marijuana use, whether it's cannabidiol for seizures, medical marijuana, or fully legal. But it's about 312 million out of the 325 million Americans live in a state where there's some level of use. And the federal government needs to catch up to what the states and the people have been doing over the last 20 years in terms of marijuana regulation. So we've got a lot on our plate in terms of what the Congress is undertaking. The first is this banking piece. The support has been really substantial. First, we had 38 attorneys general supporting, endorsing the bill. We had 20 governors. We had dozens of state treasurers so that they don't just get taxes paid in cash, that can actually do it with normal banking services. We had law enforcement. We had cannabis industry groups, minority cannabis, the Cannabis National Industry Association. We had the American Bankers Association, the Independent Community Bankers Association, the Credit Union National Association, the real estate companies, the insurance companies, just a huge array of business groups as well as public officials supporting this Safe Banking Act. We think that that really will lead the way to other kinds of marijuana legislation over the course of maybe this year, certainly next year, and after that. So I could tell jokes. I can, they're not very good. Or I can take questions about where we see all of this going in terms of the Congress. But I actually, had we not passed that bill last week, I did not want to come talk to you people at all. Because I'd been saying, this is just around the corner. This is just around the corner. I know that there's substantial support among Democrats and Republicans. It's just around the corner. Finally, we got to the floor and we proved that this, unlike a lot of things that happens in the Congress, even in the midst of all the impeachment stuff that was hitting the floor of the House last week, we were able to pass this very bipartisan piece of legislation because folks recognize this is where the people are, and we need to get the federal law to catch up to where the local governments, the states are, where the people have been for some time. So if you have questions, I'd love to entertain them. Otherwise, you can have a long break.
Hi, I'm Jillian Schauer. I guess I'm the lone person here from Washington. I'm a public health consultant, but there are a lot of regulators in the room, and they have a lot of knowledge and lessons learned from their experiences. What is the opportunity for regulators to engage more with congressional leaders who are putting forward some of these bills, especially the bill on rescheduling? What are some thoughtful ways that regulators could engage with you all?
Good question. So in terms of helping us design, because right now there are probably 2-3 dozen different bills that are sitting out there in those general areas I was talking about: research and testing, taxes, and then the big descheduling, rescheduling, different types of regulating the industry. Denny Heck, for your state, is the lead guy. And to the degree you have ideas or others have ideas, you can kind of go through the list of people who voted for this banking bill and get a sense whether your member of Congress is interested or opposed. And they're all going to be interested. And any assistance you could give would be greatly appreciated. And I know Washington has come, the state has a number of groups that have come to meet with me and Denny and some others to kind of give us best practices, some ideas, some tips. And we definitely welcome that, because now we're moving from the public safety, in my opinion, the public safety component of banking, where I'm on financial services, Denny's on financial services. We're moving now into more of the healthcare space or the tax space. That's not really our committee or our specific areas, but because we've been working on this so much, we're going to be able to help others in the Congress, design, refine their particular pieces of legislation. But the first thing that I want to see happen is this bill move through the Senate and then get to the President's desk. We think that there have been good signs coming out of the Senate that indicate they're interested in moving this bill forward. Where there had been a lot of resistance, Senator Crapo from Idaho, which is one of the few states that doesn't have any marijuana allowed, although apparently there's going to be a medical marijuana initiative in the state of Idaho. There's some things in the bill that he's interested in. We added hemp because for bankers generally, they're not chemists. They don't know how much THC is in anything, and they would have a hard time, determining what's hemp, what's marijuana, that kind of stuff. So even though the agriculture bill, McConnell added an amendment at the last minute last year to legalize hemp with THC levels below 0.3%. If you're a banker, You don't know whether something has 0.3% or 0.31% or any of that stuff. So this bill is designed both for hemp and marijuana to create a safe harbor for the banks to say if they do business with a marijuana business or the landlord of a marijuana business or the lawyer of a marijuana business, that just because they're doing banking services with that business or ancillary business, it's not proceeds of an illegal activity. Right now, the law, because of the Controlled Substance Act, says money from a marijuana business or that goes to the landlord or goes directly to the bank could be considered proceeds of an illegal activity, which then is money laundering. And that's what we're trying to do, is create a safe harbor from the money laundering statutes. The businesses and the banks still have to ensure that they've still got to comply and say there's no mafia money, no organized crime, no cartel, that there are precautions in place, that kids can't get their hands on it, and that it's open and transparent so that we know if there's any kind of skimming or tax evasion as well. So those compliance components are still there. But the basic is we're taking it out of the money laundering statutes just because it's marijuana or hemp. But we do need your help. Anybody else?
Thanks for taking my question. My name is Boz Yordanoff. I'm from
Where are you?
right here.
Right here doesn't help me. Oh, okay.
I'm from the Royal Canadian Mounted Police in Vancouver.
Yes, sir.
Could you speak a little bit about the pathway that you see to legalization at the federal level, whether that goes through first the legalization of hemp and how you see that playing out? And also if you could give a little bit of a timeline, that would be helpful.
Sure.
Thanks.
And so the fact you're from Canada, that's another component of this that we didn't quite address in the Safe Banking Act as it sits in, as it's come out of the House. I hopefully will fix it a little bit more in the Senate, which is what about money going back and forth between Canada and the United States, where Canada has legalized it and we still have prohibition against it here in the United States. We need to normalize sort of that flow of cash across the border. So, Ashley, will you remember? I need to talk to the Senate about that. Thank you for reminding about me. The timing of all this is still kind of up in the air, but this is how I see it. So the banking bill will move through the Senate, and to the degree they amend it or change it, we may have to have a conference committee to resolve differences between the House version of the bill and the Senate version of the bill. That'll probably happen over the next 2-3 months. We've had encouraging comments from the banking committee chair, plus the fact we have hemp in there, and hemp still has trouble getting banked all the time. We think that the majority leader in the Senate, McConnell, will move this forward. So we're hoping to see the banking bill move over the next 3 to 6 months. The other bills, I'd say the next one that has the best chance of moving forward quickly probably would be the research and testing bills that really determine whether or not, what are the pros and cons of marijuana, of hemp. So that could happen over the course of the next year. The rescheduling and descheduling, the really big bill that you're talking about, the legalizing, I expect that the Judiciary Committee of the House of Representatives will take up there are 2 bills. There's one called the MORE Act, and I don't remember what the acronym stands for, but it's MORE Act. And the other one, and that's by Jerry Nadler, the chairman of the Judiciary Committee. The other is called the Marijuana Justice Act by Barbara Lee out of California. So those 2 bills are the big bills that really deschedule, reschedule marijuana, and then provide for criminal justice reform, because a lot of people have had marijuana violations, can't go to work for the federal government, whatever. There's a big criminal justice component to those bills. We expect those bills to be heard by the committee and voted on by the committee by the end of the year. And then it will come to the floor of the House. Probably be voted on by the whole House first 3 months of next year, I would guess. Now, whether the Senate takes it up at all is a real question mark. But I think the House will address the research and testing pretty soon. I think we'll address the descheduling, rescheduling by the end of the year, at least in the committee, and then the House, the whole House of Representatives will address it in probably the first quarter of next year. I don't know whether the Senate is prepared to deal with it. We were really worried about just the banking piece of this thing, but we seem to be getting good signs that it'll move. I'm not sure what else they'll do over there. Maybe the research and testing. Thank you. Hi.
Hi, Congressman. My name is Betsy Cavendish. I'm General Counsel to Mayor Bowser. So thank you very much for your work on this. To add to your talk about public safety, we've had 4 homicides in the District of Columbia in the past year associated with illegal marijuana sales, and lots of shootings and gun violence. It's a cash industry, and so we really appreciate your efforts to get this out of being a cash industry. And I'd be happy to give you fact sheets on that if that's helpful to you. I don't have them on my hand right now, but to your list of matters before the Congress, I hope you could also consider lifting the rider, as the House has done, that prohibits the District of Columbia from having a legal tax and sales regime. We think it would conduce greatly to public safety, in line with your talking points on the banking bill. We appreciate your being an original co-sponsor of statehood and continuing efforts to let us govern our own budget, because Congress is really creating a problem for the District of Columbia. No tax revenues, the violence associated with it. We just can't get in and have a regulated regime. And the mayor has a detailed bill that reflects the best thinking and experience of all the states that have already done it. It's a responsible regime, and Congress is standing in the way.
So was that rider on our last appropriations bills?
The House just lifted it, and it's over at the Senate now, but we're concerned that the idea of a budget bill that has, quote, no poison pills means the status quo would continue, and we don't consider the marijuana bill, the marijuana rider, a poison pill. And furthermore, we shouldn't have it at all.
And I'll talk to, often, and most of you know this, but riders are added to different appropriations bills. Many of them are aimed at the District of Columbia, because the Congress has some say as to the laws in D.C. Certainly we will I'll work with my Appropriations Committee for them to sort of stand strong on eliminating that rider, so that you all can do business as you see fit. Okay? No, you're absolutely right. I think they're discriminating against the center of this room, so I'm sorry that they're not seeing your hand. But I'll call on you.
Mayor Sean Ford, Commerce City, Colorado.
Who are you?
Mayor Sean Ford, Commerce City, Colorado. Good to see you again. I want to thank you for all of your efforts. What we're seeing in our community is the fact that these organizations and these businesses are in our community. They're providing a service, but I expect them to engage the community and give back. It's really hard, based on the laws, for these organizations to provide support for Boys and Girls Club, Habitat for Humanity, veterans organizations, the areas where we need them to play a role. Drug-free programs in schools. 280E, rulemaking 280E is having a huge effect on where they can put money into our communities and where they can give back. I think the banking issue is one thing. I don't think you can put this industry back in the bottle. So we have to figure out how to be able to make sure that these businesses can effectively help our communities in the areas where we need them to help our communities. And the other question I have is on regulation. it seems like after being at this conference for just one day, seeing that every community is trying to regulate in their own way, oversight, the vaping issues and what's happening from a health perspective. We need to have some rules that apply to the industry, that the industry knows what they're doing, and we know what we can expect for product that's being moved within our communities. Thank you.
Good to see you, Sean. So sort of to the general point that you're making, I mean, here in Colorado, you know, by constitutional amendment, we give local governments a lot of authority to do their own thing as it relates to marijuana businesses. And so you do get a little bit of a checkerboard kind of a approach as to how Commerce City may do something, or Wheat Ridge may do something, or some other community. And I think it's going to be state by state. There is going to be a lot of different approaches. At the federal level, you know, we've made it hard for marijuana businesses to be philanthropic, to be able to contribute to the different kinds of organizations you're talking about, because the money's illegal at this point. You know, we've said under the Cole Memo and the FinCEN guidance that the banks who do want to provide services, or the credit unions that do want to provide services, they go through these hoops. They're going to be low in terms of enforcement issues with the Justice Department or the Treasury Department. But it still is difficult to take that cash and put it to charitable use. The deductions aren't there as well, because you can hardly take business deductions for these various companies. So you're right, the banking piece is just one. In fact, it's a very narrow component of all this. But there are a lot of there's a lot of force behind it to get it passed and to break the ice here, to break this logjam that really has been in existence since 1971. And I appreciate, you know, your desire as a mayor to get, you know, more of your businesses to contribute to the different, you know, programs you want to provide in the city, the parks you want to build, and all that stuff. This is the first thing that's going to get to those things that you want, you know, to be able to bring the industry, you know, into the mainstream, and to allow them to contribute to the community with the resources that they have. So it's a good question. Keep an eye on this one, because there are going to be a number of things right behind it. So I said the research and study is one thing. A guy named Earl Blumenauer. So do we have any Oregonians in the office? So Earl has been the quarterback of all of these bills. I mean, he really has been the guy who's been trying to normalize all of this for years. And so he's sort of the center, along with Barbara Lee from California, of, you know, getting the banking bill moving, getting the research and development, getting the PTSD legislation for veterans. But he is the main sponsor, and it's his committee on the taxes and to provide real deductions for marijuana businesses and marijuana-related businesses, which would then help Sean Ford over here in Commerce City so that his businesses could actually make charitable contributions and get deductions for it. So I don't want to forget Earl, because he really has been at the center of all this to try to get these things so that they all work together, the state laws, the local laws, and the federal law.
Sorry. Hi, sir. Bia Campo, Office of Marijuana Policy, City of Denver. You mentioned that in 2012 you were against Amendment 64, and now you were one of the champions at the federal level for legalization. Can you just tell us, like, how was your mindset and, like, what made you change? If it just had to do with, like, the will of the voters, or if it was a discontinued process of construction of your opinion, and how, like, what were the factors that played into it?
Sure. That's a great question. So in 2012, when we passed it here in the state, I didn't support it. A number of my family members did. Barney Frank, the head of the Democratic Caucus and Financial Services, said, look, Colorado's taking the lead. You got to take the lead on this bill to get the cash piece of this thing so it isn't a problem. So I took it on, knowing full well that our state was taking the lead on this, and I better take the lead. So I did it more from a business and a kind of representative capacity than a personal capacity. But there was some evolution for me, just in terms of one of my brother-in-laws was a senior ski instructor up at Vail, and he'd been out in the sun for decades, and he developed melanoma, and then it spread to everything else. And the only thing that gave him any comfort and allowed him to have any appetite was marijuana. And in the last year of his life, I saw that this was the only thing that helped at all. And then I have a daughter with epilepsy. We were really sort of at wit's end. She'd had it a long time. We'd tried all different kinds of medicines, surgery to avoid the seizures, and none of it worked until just at the end, right as we were legalizing it, a medicine did come out, but we were moving to marijuana and cannabis oil to try to deal with the seizures. So I had two instances of a brother-in-law and a daughter where there was this medical element to it all, which then gave me a whole other perspective than I'd had. And then eventually, as other states started either having medical marijuana or fully legal, we saw this problem with the cash just continue to increase. And I just knew we had to get this done. So there was a personal evolution, but there was the evolution as being a member of the banking committee or the financial services committee. We had to get this moving because people were getting killed.
Good morning,
Good morning.
Congress Ed. My name is Yadira Silva from the Denver's Committee, Cannabis Equity Committee, and I'm here in representation of many Latinos who wants to come and be part of the industry. And I would to request some type of protection for our communities from being
Targeted?
yes, from being taken out from our citizenships for being in the industry. So I know that is something within your schedule to do, and I will request some type of protection for us so we can be also included in such a wonderful industry without losing our privilege as well.
Okay. Well, there are about 14 questions in your question, and none of them are easy. Obviously, we want to make sure that this industry is available to everybody. And within the banking bill that I just passed, there's a piece of it that requires the Federal Reserve to do a study to make sure that minority communities are not excluded from the marijuana industry, that the banking community makes sure that there is not discrimination. Your question is a little broader, which, we've got all sorts of, illegal immigration, I think, is kind of mixed into your question a little bit. And obviously, the Trump administration and Ed Perlmutter are very different on how we view, issues of immigration. And I think that we first make sure there's no discrimination and that the industry is open to all, whoever you might be, white, black, brown, purple, doesn't matter, men and women. And then to make sure that we have enough people in the industry to do all the work that needs to be done and not to exclude anybody. So let's talk about it a little bit after this breakout session, and we can get to more specifics on that. Okay, thank you.
Good morning. Thank you for taking time today. Joe Devlin, recovering California regulator. I now work for a startup. You've touched on this a little bit around the periphery, but can you maybe share your thoughts on 280E, and is that conversation taking place inside Washington around the banking bill?
Yes. So 280, again, at the center of that is Earl Blumenauer. And the Ways and Means Committee, which deals with taxes and deductions and all of that, is going to address it. He's a senior member of that committee, and I think that will now move because I think it will have a lot of business support as well as, regulator support, taxing authorities at all. So, I don't know if I have the bill number with me, but clearly there is a bill, and it's his to deal with 280E issues. And I think it will move along with this research and testing. It'll be interesting to see if the Senate wants to expand the banking bill at all, because they can. There are issues of whether a matter is germane, is it part of the subject matter of the bill or not. They have sort of broader accommodation for what's germane or not. They potentially could add something like that to the banking bill. I don't know how they want to approach it, but that's a possibility. And we could, maybe get the taxes and the banking done under one title. Anybody else? Well, I just want to, somebody over here.
Good morning, Henny Lastly with Smart Colorado. Thank you for your service. As we've seen in Colorado, the Healthy Kids Colorado survey has shown a statistically significant increase in youth use around dabbing and edibles, which of course are high potent pot. Would the House have any appetite to more of a phase-in process around banking if the Senate were to pass the bill, in terms of perhaps looking at different products that the marijuana industry produces that might in fact impact our young people? Thank you.
I doubt it. I think we're going to look at the banking piece as just banking, that it's about cash. We want to get the cash off the streets. I'd say that's more of a local or a state government, and not to pass the buck as to who determines how potent anything is, but I think that's going to be more of a state or local government decision to try to regulate that and not do it through the banking system. But we'll see how the Senate wants to approach this. I know there has been talk about, well, shouldn't we determine how potent something is and try to reduce potency? Well, under the federal law, you can't even study the potency. Okay, states can. So unless we add some component about research and testing, it's very difficult. And I'm not sure whether we want to add that to the bank. I guess I'd be reluctant to add that to the banking bill. Now, if it's to say we want to add research and testing to the banking bill, I could go along with that. But to try to then set limits as to the potency, I don't think this is the proper piece of legislation for that. I think it's probably more state and local governments or a separate piece of legislation. As to, I don't want to make the bankers chemists and have to figure out potency. That's part of what I just want to give them a safe harbor so they can do banking. But I hear you. Yes.
I know you kind of addressed this, earlier, but just kind of curious about the future, what you see the future, beyond the banking bill. as far as federal legalization. There's kind of a debate whether it should be on a state level, a federal level, and I know there's so many different factors involved in that. But what do you see as far as a timeline? What do you see really truly happening down the road for legalization?
I think that it's going to be at least a couple-year proposition for us to really refine and develop our thinking about legalization, and whether it's going to be sort of a federal regulation type of system similar to alcohol, or whether we're going to have a state-by-state approach, but we just say the federal government is going to step back and be hands-off as to whether it's legal or illegal. We'll let the states do it. I don't think that the majority of the House has even, gotten anywhere near trying to figure that piece out. It will start, this whole conversation will start in the Judiciary Committee probably within the next month or 2 months with the MORE Act and the Marijuana Justice Act. The conversation and the markup of those two bills will be the real beginning of that discussion. But I think it'll be a course of a year or two for a majority of the House and a majority of the Senate to figure out what the overall regulatory structure should look like, whether it's going to be a national kind of system or remain a state-by-state kind of approach. But I do know, whether we're talking 280E and allowing for deductions, I know there certainly are federal regulators that would also be interested in taxing the industry. So we'll see exactly how that unveils. But I'd say look at the Judiciary Committee over the next few months and see how that proceeds, and then see how we look at it on the House floor over the next 6 months, I would say. But really, to get to the full rescheduling or descheduling and overall regulatory approach, I'd say that's at least a year to 2 years off. Looks like there's one more, and then probably lunchtime break.
Exactly. This is we only have time for one last question here.
Heike Newman with the University of Colorado and Anschutz Medical Campus. You keep talking about the research and testing initiative, and I was wondering if you could expand on that just a little bit more and maybe provide some information as to whether the single source supplier for research marijuana may be expanded so that researchers have more sources available to actually do clinical research.
Good question. I think the goal would be to just open it up so that you all could figure out what's good, what's bad, what is beneficial, how potent something is. So I would hope that we're going to be more than a single source. Let me see if I can find the bill. I don't think I have it, but it's designed, I know, to really allow an institution like CU or any other kind of laboratory to do the kind of scientific research that laboratory feels it needs to do and try not to limit it. That would be my goal, and I think that's what the legislation is, and I'm sorry I don't have the particular bill, but we want to broaden it so that there can be more study of this than certainly has been conducted to date. And I think all of us need that from a regulatory standpoint. The industry obviously would be benefited by all of that. So, again, as Sean Ford said, we're not putting the genie back in the bottle. We have virtually the entire country has some level of marijuana use, and hemp too. And so we want to be able to understand this product, this crop, this whatever, in a much better fashion. We want to be able to deal with the taxes on it. And then ultimately, to this woman's question, we want to make sure there's social equity and criminal justice reform as it attaches to all this. My little part of this, the banking piece, has sort of been the spearhead to get this whole conversation moving where it's been very slow. And I know I've had a chance to talk to a number of groups, not specifically regulators such as yourselves, but obviously you're dealing with a new industry. And the federal government needs to catch up to where you are so that we can all work together as a team, because the people have spoken. You know, this isn't like Ed Perlmutter, the legislator, says, we're going to have marijuana next week. The people of the state of Colorado, the people of Washington, the people of California, I think the people of Idaho, when they vote on it this fall or next year, they're going to speak. So ours is a very people-driven kind of approach to this, and you people have caught up. Now it's time for the federal government to catch up. We'll deal with questions such as yours about potency and things like that, but we're just trying to get the cash off the streets right now. But that one leads the way to all of this other legislation that needs to catch up. So thank you for your time. Thank you for your attention. Happy to answer a few questions afterwards. And you and I should visit a little bit more about minority communities working in the industry. Thank you all very much.
All right, everyone, I really appreciated your comment about what can we as regulators do. So if you all want to get together and as a regulator, maybe get together and organize a letter to be sent in support of Congressman Perlmutter's Safe Banking Act, we've got his assistant here, Ashley Verville, and you all can contact her, and her email address is ashley, ASHLEY, VERVILLE @mail.house.gov. Also, Mayor Hancock has organized, I think we had, Ashley, what, about 13 mayors sign a letter also in favor of the Safe Banking Act. Yeah, yeah. And so the mayor's got a couple of mayors already signed to that. If you have a mayor that would be interested in signing on to that, we could get some additional signatures and then reissue that. So thanks again, Congressman. Yes? Yes.
Any of them have their state treasurers, attorneys general, mayors, or governors who aren't on our list, we'd love to get them on the list.
Okay. So did you guys hear that? The congressman just said if you all have any other state treasurers, mayors, AGs, anyone in your district who you think would be interested in signing on to some of these letters that have already been issued, and they could be reissued with those additional signatures. All right. Well, thanks again. We really appreciate it. All right, everyone, time for lunch, and we'll see you back for the next panel.